It's too late. Diana wasn't sure what time it was, but she was certain it was too late for someone to be calling. She hoped it was Marty's phone. She muffled her face with a pillow and loudly said, "Thank you," when the call stopped after the fifth ring. She only felt a bit more at ease when the phone rang again. "Damn it," she exclaimed, opening her eyes. "Martin, answer your phone." The words abruptly halted when she realized her husband wasn't beside her. She looked at the clock. 3:00 in the morning. She picked up the phone from the bedside table and wondered why her husband wasn't there. He was there when they went to bed a few hours ago. "Yes, hello," she said into the phone. "Is this Diana Miller?" "Yes, that's right." "Who is this? Are you Martin Miller's wife?" "Yes, oh God, that's right." "Who is this, Mrs. Miller?" "This is the emergency room at Northtown Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago, and we have your contact information from the accident a year ago. He was in a car accident. Can you come right away?" "Oh God, is he okay?" "I don't have the authority to discuss his condition over the phone." "Can you come?" "Yes, definitely. I'll come right away." She rushed upstairs where her daughter was sleeping. Dallas, named after the city she was born in, was attending a local university, but still lived at home to save money. She liked living in the dorms in her first year, but as she grew older, she realized that living near the school wasn't conducive to her studies. "Dal, wake up." "It's nothing, Dally. Wake up this time." She gently shook her on the shoulder. Still, nothing. "Dallas, wake up. Your father had an accident. He's in the emergency room. You need to get dressed. We have to go." She stood up from the bed and pulled the nightgown over her head. She didn't think, at 20, that she would be standing naked in front of her mother. As for Diana, she didn't even notice, as she was too busy getting clothes for Dallas. Once both women were dressed, they quickly drove to the hospital. Dallas kept asking questions about what had happened, but Diana had no additional information. Time seemed to drag on like a millennium before they arrived, but it was only about 10 minutes considering the lack of traffic. They were led to Martin's room in the emergency and shock unit, shocked at his condition, wrapped in bandages and clearly unconscious. They were handed forms to fill out. Grief doesn't exempt you from paperwork. Dallas pushed her chair closer to her father. They were there for about an hour before a pair of male and female police officers walked in. "Good evening, ma'am. I am Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my teammate, Robert Hansen. We were the first ones at the scene. Any news on his condition?" "No one tells us anything," Officer Diana replied. "Oh, this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you a few questions. I know this may not be the most appropriate time, but it's best to do this as soon as possible." "Sure. Do you know what your husband was doing on the road at this time?" "He was at home, and we went to bed together around 10 p.m. I didn't even know he left until the hospital called." Mrs. Stanton said, "Dallas, can you confirm this?" "Indeed, we watched a movie on TV, finished by 10 p.m. And then we went to bed together. I saw Dad in the bedroom with Mom." "What movie was it?" "Some action movie with Keanu Reeves, Dad picked." "Any specific issues, perhaps financial or marital?" "There's nothing that all couples don't face." "No specific problems?" "No. I just don't understand why he left the house without telling me." "Was the person in the other car injured?" "That's the issue, Mrs. Miller. It's a single car accident, and according to 2 witnesses, your husband's car was driving normally and then suddenly accelerated straight into a large oak tree at the intersection of 121 and 288. No brake marks, and no one remembers seeing brake lights." Diana and Dallas looked at the officers as it was clear they were suggesting something. "Are you implying that my husband did this intentionally, that he tried to commit suicide? We need to check the car for possible mechanical issues, and of course, we'll need to talk to your husband when he wakes up, but that's certainly one of the possibilities we're considering, yes." "Are you sure there are no other notable issues?" "Officer, I love my husband very much, and we have a wonderful marriage. No specific issues that I can think of. I'm sure it's just him losing control or dozing off, as it was very late. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." Diana cried and couldn't finish her sentence. Officer Stanton placed one of her cards on the table and asked them to call if they remembered any additional information, then left the hospital. Dallas closed Martin's room door. "You didn't tell them?" "No, Dallas, I didn't." Your mother answered. When the tears stopped, it wasn't their business and had nothing to do with it. Your father didn't pay attention to it. Maybe he'll say something when they talk to him. We'll see. The next few days passed slowly. Martin still didn't wake up and continued to be hospitalized, while Diana and Dallas spent as much time there as possible. They often stayed together, making sure he was never left alone. Fortunately, Diana knew Martin's boss and called him to explain what had happened and that he wouldn't be coming to work. She carefully avoided saying anything that might suggest a suicide attempt. The accident occurred on Saturday night, and finally, Martin began showing signs of consciousness on Wednesday morning. By midday, his eyes were open, although he could only look around. Diana was there and noticed his gaze, so she approached the bedside to reassure him that everything would be okay. A few seconds later, a nurse hurried into the room, something on the monitor alerting her that the patient had awakened. Diana returned to her seat to let the nurse do her job. Soon, more doctors entered the room to examine Martin. Diana took the opportunity to step outside and call Dallas, informing her that her father had woken up. Dallas didn't answer, so she left a voicemail. Early on, most medical equipment had been removed. Martin's left arm was broken, but since he was right-handed, it shouldn't limit him too much. His throat was sore due to the tube, so he was given a whiteboard to communicate. The nurse read the message and asked if he was sure. Martin nodded. The nurse quickly exited the hallway as the checks continued. "Mrs. Miller, I have to inform you that your husband has requested not to allow you back into his room, and your daughter is the same. He is your husband, and you have the right to be there with him. Unfortunately, Mrs. Miller, the patient's wishes take precedence. Please let me talk to him, and we'll address any issues." Diana tried to get past the nurse but couldn't get any closer, so she yelled, "Martin, Martin, please talk to me. What's going on?" "Mrs. Miller, please stop shouting. You're disturbing our other patient. If you want, you can wait outside the room, but if we catch you trying to enter the room or making noise, we'll have to escort you out of the building. Do you understand?" "Yes, of course." Diana had no choice. Finally, Dallas arrived at the hospital 45 minutes later and found her mother sitting on a chair outside the room. "Mom, why are you here? Dad banned us from entering the room." "Who are we, and why did he ban both of us?" "It means Mom is understood. But why both of us? What does it mean, and why did Mom take so long to come here?" "I just woke up when Bradley came to check if I was okay. We're too sacred, Mom. Mom had sex with Mom's boyfriend instead of being here for Dad." "Sorry, Mom, but he wasn't awake when I left." Dallas replied with a tone that expressed no remorse. "It's really stressful, and I need to relax. It works really well if Mom wants to know. Call when there's a chance." "Mom, I won't do that. And let's not talk about it right now. It's disrespectful." The irony of the situation made Dallas chuckle lightly. There was a knock on the door, followed by a slender and very attractive woman with black hair. She was dressed beautifully and professionally, but didn't look like a doctor, although her badge indicated she was a staff member. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health experts. How are you feeling?" "As best as I can guess. It's been 9 days since the accident." He regained the ability to talk, and the whiteboard was a thing of the past. He inquired about when he could be discharged, but a clear answer was never obtained. "Nevertheless, the hospital requested me to talk to you." "That's fine. I have a choice, right? If you want to go home early, I really need to release you, to let you go." The psychiatrist replied, with a mysterious smile on her face. "So, let's begin." Dr. Lassiter pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, crossing her long legs. It took her a few minutes to go through the documents. "All right, you were brought to the hospital over a week ago after an accident, colliding with a large oak tree. I also noticed you prohibited your wife and daughter from visiting, and I suspect these things might be related." "I understand," Martin responded. "She deceived me." Unfortunately, this is common nowadays, although rarely resulting in such a reaction. "Is there anything else?" Martin remained silent for a few minutes. He really didn't want to talk about it, especially with an attractive woman. He wondered if they had a male expert, an old man, to talk to. Dr. Lassiter waited patiently. It wasn't the first time she had to wait for someone to force themselves to speak. "All right, I have depression. I think, not diagnosed or anything. I'm just, as I said, bored from something specific or just overall. I think I can't, because I haven't had an erection effect for a long time, a year after the previous accident." Right, of course. She knew she probably had his entire medical history in her hands, but she wanted him to say it himself. "Yes, that's not even an accident. I was at the back, my boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. We were rear-ended, no airbags or even significant damage, but I wasn't prepared for that. I hit my head on the front seat. I guess that might be why. The report says you were struck and had a mild concussion." The doctor couldn't explain that. No medication worked. They conducted a series of tests, some multiple times, and the best explanation is what? "I understand that something happened and part of my brain was damaged, so I can't have an erection effect. This led to my wife becoming increasingly dissatisfied with our sex life, which in turn led her to have an extramarital affair. This ultimately caused me to collapse and led to the events of that evening." "Is that about right?" "Yes, that's correct." "And how long before your wife did this?" "Probably about 7 or 8 months, I think. We tried to address the issue through different means, as you know, with certain helpers." "Yes, I understand how it works, Mr. Miller. I had sexual relations before that. Of course, I regret it a little. But, anyway, everything was fine at first, and we hoped my abilities would recover. We talked about spending the entire weekend in bed, having a good time. Of course, that never happened. Finally, it took too long, and she decided to address her needs elsewhere." "Did he discuss this with you beforehand?" "No, I found out about this when I came home early from work. Cliché, I know, and not only was she at home with her lover, but her daughter and her boyfriend were also there." "Did they do this as a group?" Dr. Lassiter asked, surprise evident in her tone. "No, thank God. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, while Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I knew my wife was deceiving me, and my daughter knew and seemed complicit, which explains why my daughter was also banned." "Yes, oh, and if I haven't mentioned it before, Bill is Brad's father. We knew him randomly before because he's your daughter's boyfriend's father. Then, I found out that my daughter proposed Bill to her mother. This was another blow." "Have you confronted them?" "Not really. Perhaps if Dallas hadn't been there, I would have confronted Diana, but I had seen enough of my daughter's body, and then I left." "How did you explain it afterward?" "Not as I expected. She regretted that I found out about it, but she made it clear that if I couldn't care for her, she would delegate that to someone else, prioritizing a full-time partner, as she put it, rather than giving people time to find someone new. Bill is single and has similar needs, so he's her choice." "Your actions. What could I do?" "She was right about me not being able to have sexual relations. It's not her fault that I can't, so she did what she needed to do. But suppose, hypothetically, she had asked beforehand, would you have agreed?" "You know, I've thought a lot about that, and a part of me wants to say that I would agree because I love her and want her to be happy. But I think I wouldn't be happy with that. We made vows, we promised, and one of those things is in sickness or in health. I didn't do that with her, so I can't accept her doing it with me." Clearly, she continued to meet him. And now that I know about it, she becomes less discreet about it. I don't know if she started doing it more than before. I don't know the frequency of their actions before, but previously, it was limited to the days I was at work. Now it includes trips to the store on weekends, and a portion of that time is clearly spent with Bill. It's undoubtedly challenging, difficult, not enough to describe the situation. But again, I don't think I can do anything about it. She deserves a sex life, but I can't provide it. And all of it is killing me. Tell me about the night the accident happened. The whole family was watching a movie on TV. I kept the mental pain and anguish to myself. I thought it was a mistake, but I didn't want to be a burden to Diana or Dallas. They kissed and hugged each other before bedtime, while I received goodnight wishes from Dallas. I think at that moment, I realized that she had completely lost respect for me, as a father and as a man. I can hardly blame her because I don't respect myself either. I prepared to go to sleep as usual. Diana did the same. Everything was like every other night. Every night was the same. I waited until Diana fell asleep, then put on clothes, grabbed my wallet and keys, went upstairs, and looked into Dallas's room. She was also sleeping. I gave her a kiss and said goodbye. I left and drove my car. I knew there was an airbag on it, but I thought if I hit hard enough, it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan, just driving around the area. I knew about the large oak tree. I had driven past it the first time and realized that there was no obstacle, and the approach was quite direct. I drove around and then headed straight to it. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both letting the story sink in. Finally, the doctor spoke. "Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for being open and sincere with me. It's truly rare. I'll let you rest a bit and think about what you've told me. Is it okay if I come back tomorrow?" "I'm not going anywhere," he said sarcastically. They shook hands, and Dr. Lassiter left the room. Martin picked up his mobile phone, which he left at home that night, and Diana had brought it to him earlier, even though he told her it wasn't necessary. He responded to some text messages and emails, also informed his boss about the latest developments, then closed his eyes and tried to sleep. When she returned home, Diana tried to control herself. She had the impression that Marty accepted her meeting with Bill, that he considered it a gift because he loved her so much. Even when she heard about the incident, she no longer believed it was an accident. She was sure it was related to that. But now, she was not so sure anymore. She suspected that the police had talked to her husband, but she hoped he hadn't mentioned anything about her relationship with Bill. The police didn't contact her anymore because extramarital affairs were not a crime, so perhaps they thought it was a suicide attempt and left it at that. The case was closed, but he never cared about it. If so, she didn't remember it. And besides, she wouldn't live a life of chastity just because a foolish man decided to falsely accuse her husband's boss. That's not something she signed up for, and she certainly wouldn't agree to that. Right after Marty returned home, she would try to figure out more about his emotions, be more controlled in her relationship with Bill, but there was no way she would give it up. The next morning, as promised, Dr. Lassiter arrived. Marty noticed the change in the doctor's outerwear. Unfortunately, little Marty still maintained its withdrawn posture. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller?" "Not much has changed since yesterday, doctor. What's your opinion on returning home?" "Part of it depends on you. But according to legal regulations, you will be held for 72 hours, starting from our conversation yesterday, so at least another 2 days." "Is that okay, doctor? At least the food here is not too bad." They both laughed. "An old story but still good," noted Dr. Lassiter. "Nice to see you joking." "Me too. It's been a while. And by a while, I mean several months, since I felt like myself. I used to be quite a joker, to the point where I sometimes annoyed Dallas. Do you have any other negative thoughts? Can we explore more dark corners in your mind?" "Mr. Lassiter, this is not that kind of case. I've been going through a pretty dull year, and the past few months have felt the same. But now, I don't feel it anymore. It has given way to anger and disappointment. Disappointment with Diana and Dallas, of course, more with Diana. Still, mostly disappointment with myself for not standing up to protect myself, for not letting my wife know that what she was doing was unacceptable. Do you intend to hold this position now? Certainly. Although I admit, I really want to get divorced right away. But I also have to accept some responsibility for letting her go over my head like that. But if she agrees to stop seeing Bill, then I'm willing to visit a counselor and try to fix our marriage. I appreciate your determination, Mr. Miller. Rarely do I see such a quick change. I've had plenty of time to think while lying here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. It helps me focus my thoughts. Excellent, Mr. Miller. Truly excellent. So I will conclude today. I'll drop by tomorrow for one last chat, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't leave the hospital on time. I'm looking forward to it. Doctor, I hope Diana and Dallas will pick him up when he's discharged. If he wants to change everything, he needs to start by acting like everything is going to change. The airbag worked significantly, much more effective than Marty expected. The worst part was the concussion he had to endure, requiring him to spend a lot of time resting in the dark. The TV was turned off, and soft music played in the background. His wife and daughter took care of him. Everything went well for over a week, until Diana announced that she needed to go shopping. "No, Marty," he said gently. "What's going on?" Diana replied. Marty puzzled. "There are things we need, including some of your healing ointment. Make a list for Dallas. She can go." "Why are you dragging me into this, Dad? Also, I had plans to meet Bradley." "Well, you have motivation to shop quickly, don't you?" Diana said. "Diana, this is laughable, Martin. You can't come home and change everything right away. Dallas had plans, and I'll go shopping. That's the final decision." "Do you think I'm a fool, Diana?" "Not a fool, Marty. Certainly not. Why do you ask that?" "Do you think I don't understand that shopping trips are a commentary to meet Bill? I've never forgotten to shop for groceries, Martin, never." "Yes, and this is an ideal cover, but you've been absent too long. And not only that, but I also see it in you, in your eyes when you don't look at me, in your clothes when they don't look right, in your makeup. There's always a bit of difference. At least you spent some time with Bill, and that won't happen anymore." The shock in Diana's eyes was evident, and Dallas suddenly felt a bit more respect for her father. "Marty, please, we've discussed this. Now I'll try harder to be more careful about my meetings. Clearly, I've become too comfortable with these appointments. But of course, I won't give them up. I have the right to a sex life, and I intend to have one." "So, what do our vows mean?" "Forget about people in sickness and health. That's part of sickness, and you shouldn't let others be left behind. But you'll do that now. You stop meeting Bill, and we'll see a counselor to fix our marriage, or not. And I'll call the divorce lawyer on Monday. You can't do this. Martin Miller, don't you dare threaten me. If I could make love to you, just you, I would. But I can't, and it's not my fault. I didn't cause the accident. I wasn't even there. Now, since I have nothing to do with it, my sex life is over, and I should just accept that. No, that's not going to happen. So, I'll go shopping, meet Bill, and ensure my needs. If you want to talk about this, we can do it tonight. But don't think you can command me what I can and cannot do." Diana stepped out of the front door, closing it with a resounding bang, making the windows shake. The silence was deafening. Father and daughter looked at each other. Then Marty went into his bedroom. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller worried about the future of her family, about her parents' marriage. Her father had never truly confronted her mother, but there had never been anything serious happening between them. But when he decided that this was an issue between them, and she couldn't do anything about it, she swallowed her pride and went to see Bradley. A part of Diana's soul hoped that Marty would never recover because she wasn't sure if she could give up Bill. Bill was bold, strong, didn't think much about whether what he was doing was right for her. He just did it. Marty was always gentle, considerate. He was Marty. When Dallas returned home, it was already dark, and she found her father lying in bed. There was a small light, which she recognized as the light from the bathroom, where the light and the door were slightly open. She realized her father wanted a little light, but there was no light bulb in the room as bright as that. "Dad." She stood with her back to her and didn't turn around, but answered, "Dallas, sorry." This caught his attention, so he carefully sat up in bed and turned to see his daughter quietly crying at the door. "What are you talking about?" He had stopped calling her by the small affectionate names he had used before when she had helped her mother find a lover, and that was his intention now, although she was crying. He couldn't help but think that everything was a scripted scenario. Dallas stepped closer until she stood right at the foot of the bed. "I'm sorry for what I did. I was just trying to help Mom, you know. She's so sad about what you had to go through, and you couldn't." Their eyes met for a moment. "Okay, you know, you couldn't do that." Father and daughter exchanged glances again, this time sharing a short smile. "But now it's over, Dally. I won't do this anymore." "Hopefully not. Dad needs me. Are you planning to divorce Mom?" "Dad hasn't made the final decision, sweetheart, but he doesn't see any other outcome unless Mom stops meeting Bill. But keep it for yourself. Mom has to change because she wants to, not because she has to." "Okay. Dad, I'm going upstairs." "Oh, I broke up with Bradley tonight." Marty tried to keep a smile off his face. He had never particularly liked that guy, but this surprised him because his little daughter seemed to have some affection or love for him. "Why is that?" Marty asked, curious about this change. "Because, Dad, one time you told me that he wasn't worthy of me. And in the end, I realized that you were right. You were right about a lot of things, Dad." A smile appeared on Marty's lips as he realized that his little daughter had grown up. Today, Dallas went up to the room and hugged him, realizing that it was their first hug in a long time. They moved away and laughed at each other. Then Marty watched Dallas leave the room silently and go upstairs. A moment later, Diana entered the room with a cold, indifferent expression. "Can you help with the groceries? Is there something there?" Marty said sarcastically, sitting down. "Yes, Marty. I told you I would go shopping, and I did." Marty pulled each bag out of the car and dumped them on the table, realizing that there were no perishables or frozen foods. He also found a receipt with the time clearly stating that she had left the grocery store just 2 hours ago. "First, I went shopping, and then I went to see Bill." As Marty already knew, this happened even though he knew it would. He pulled his things from the table and went to his room without saying another word. He wondered if he should bring up this issue again, which really didn't make any sense. Diana had made her intentions clear, so the next step was his reaction. Something had to change. "Do you want to say anything else?" his wife asked, in a tone that asserted it wouldn't make any difference. "No, Diana. You've made your point clear." Diana's expression and tone softened. She loved her husband and didn't want to lose him. He was her best friend and the person she enjoyed spending time with the most. She truly didn't think that arranging her own sexual satisfaction in these circumstances would be an issue. She hoped that eventually Marty would feel the same way. Diana nodded in acceptance and went into the closet to change into her nightwear. She had contemplated rekindling some intimate relations with her husband that she had missed, but tonight was not the night for it. As she changed for bed, Marty was either deeply asleep or pretending to be. The divorce proceedings didn't go smoothly. Diana was furious when the papers were filed. Marty was considerate enough to send them home and set up in the living room upstairs, right next to Dallas's room. Diana tried to put up a strong fight against the divorce. She hired a determined lawyer who did everything possible. They even tried to establish that he was no longer capable, especially with the suicide attempt. Marty had thought that he might try something similar, thinking it would be a good idea. He started seeking counseling within the same week the papers were filed. The psychologist he saw was reputable, And when he testified that Marty was certainly no longer a suicide risk, the judge agreed. The battle might have lasted longer. But just when Diana seemed ready to follow in his footsteps, Dallas intervened. She made it clear to her mother that they were wrong, and Diana's needs did not outweigh the vows and commitments she had made. Life is not always fair, and she had to stand by her husband and endure it together. Dallas also made it clear that any further resistance would damage the mother-daughter relationship in the future, possibly permanently. Faced with the prospect of losing both her husband and daughter, Diana felt she had no choice and abandoned her opposition to the divorce. The house was sold, and Marty agreed to pay child support for a few years, knowing the judge would require it. Diana rented a 2-bedroom apartment not far from her workplace, allowing her to work full-time. 8 months after the official divorce, it left her with a bitter taste, especially when Bill informed her that they were ending things. It seemed there were a few more women he went to bed with, and Diana lost her allure when she was no longer a wife. Dallas continued her university studies, alternating between both parents. Over time, Diana began to portray herself as a victim, continuing to blame Marty for the divorce. Once again, when Dallas heard her mother say, "If she understood better," she snapped at her, "Have you thought about Dad?" Marty entered the dimly lit club around 10 p.m. It was a Friday night, and he just wanted to get out of the house for a bit. He was only seeking a short-lived, enjoyable distraction. He wanted to have a drink and maybe dance a little. He took a seat at the bar and ordered a rum and coke. As he took a sip from the glass, he glanced around the crowd and noticed a woman at the end of the bar who looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. In front of her was an almost empty glass of wine. Her dark brown hair was long, and the dress she wore just covered her chest. Marty looked closer and remembered. A small smile appeared on his lips as he received his drink and approached her. She looked at him as he approached. Dr. Lassiter. She looked straight into his eyes and scrutinized his face for a moment, but couldn't recognize him immediately. Marty thought he might be mistaken. "I'll leave, Dr. Lassiter. In the real world, I'm Vicky, but I'm afraid you're putting me in an awkward position. It's been a while, and I'm sure you've been in contact with more patients than me, with outstanding psychologists. I'm better with names than faces. Check me, Martin Miller." Vicky examined the name for a moment, and Marty patiently waited for her to admit defeat. He looked at her carefully, and if asked later, he would swear he saw the light bulb in her head and how it turned on. Ah, Mr. Miller, the unfaithful husband, and a sudden encounter with a tree. If I'm not mistaken, you're not wrong, and I'm amazed. We only spoke twice, more than a year ago. More like almost 2 years ago. It's just luck. Don't you want to join me? Marty sat down, called the waiter to refill their drinks. "Thank you, I'm quite pleased. So, why are you here tonight? Are you dating someone?" "I'm trying," Vicky replied, and the light in her eyes made it clear what she wanted to say. "Really? I remember seeing quite an impressive diamond on your finger. Perhaps that's it. Not long after my divorce was settled, I still wore the rings while trying to persuade my ex-husband, that he really had nothing in common with a 20-year-old cashier, except for the desire to invite one of her friends to join them in bed. It didn't work. He got too fed up. So they are still together, aren't they? Perhaps it's a surprise for you, Mr. Miller, but after my divorce was settled, I completely lost interest in Wayne's marital situation. I have no tiny consciousness about his marriage. This might be a foolish question, and please don't call me Mr. Miller anymore, Marty or Martin, or even a crazy person. Anything except Mr. Miller. What does your wife call you, Marty?" "She usually calls me Marty." "So, Marty, can you lead me to the dance floor?" "I'll handle that." Martin asked the bartender to keep their drinks safe behind the counter, then took Vicky by the hand and led her to the dance floor. It was a fast-paced song, and they quickly found their rhythm. The next song followed with another fast dance, and then a slow one. They stayed on the dance floor the whole time, holding each other close to the slow music. Vicky wrapped her arms around Martin's neck, while his hands were securely placed behind her. As a man, Martin immediately noticed the absence of a bra. They locked eyes for a moment before Vicky laid her head on his shoulder. They still didn't let go of each other when the second song began. Martin got lost in the sensation of this beautiful woman, her delightful fragrance overwhelming. When the song ended, Vicky took advantage of the slight decrease in music volume to say a few words. "Martin, I'm tired of dancing, but I'm also very lonely, if you know what I mean," she whispered in his ear. He took her hand and led her back to the bar, paid the tab, and informed the server they didn't need any more drinks. He wasn't surprised. She had come to the club by Uber, so they got into his car, and Martin drove back to the apartment he had bought for Vicky. "Perhaps I'm asking a bit late, but how much have you had to drink?" "That was my first drink at the bar, when you approached," she replied. "So what's the question? Because I don't take advantage of a drunk woman's situation." "Don't worry about that, Martin." They parked the car in the underground garage and took the elevator up to his floor. Vicky held onto him tightly during this time, and they shared passionate kisses a few times just as the elevator doors closed. Vicky grabbed the tail of her dress and pulled it over her head. "Oh my, Vicky, you're truly stunning," Martin said. "Thank you, Martin, but are you just going to stand there and watch?" "Certainly not just to watch." "Then lead me to your bedroom." Martin took her hand and led her through the hallway. Luckily, Dallas was visiting her mother that weekend. "I hope you have condoms." Martin actually had some in a bedside drawer and pulled them out, placing them on the nightstand. They finally began to sober up after over an hour of enjoying each other intimately and continuously. Martin lay on his back, and Vicky lay beside him, holding him tightly. They weren't entirely asleep, but they relaxed in that odd realm between sleep and wakefulness. Martin felt Vicky lift her head. "Martin, I just remembered that there's a tangled situation in this story, so I'm wondering if you remember. Obviously, it's not an issue anymore, right?" "What happened?" "A few months after the incident in Oak, I began to feel better, a sensation like stimulation. How should I express it? This is what I imagined it would feel like when a paralyzed muscle begins to recover. This feeling lasted for several weeks." "You're still married, right?" "What did you tell her?" "Officially still married, but we've been living separately for a few weeks before that." "And no, I didn't say anything." "It's not her business." In the following months, I started experiencing morning aches more often, sometimes even during the day. After 8 or 9 months, everything returned to normal quite a bit. "What did the doctors say?" "They had no answers, at least no noteworthy ones. They conducted all sorts of tests and scans and compared them with the times I couldn't function, but they couldn't pinpoint anything specific. In the end, they attributed it to a peculiar brain trick. They thought the impact on the tree resolved the issue. They simply didn't know. Perhaps it was the tree, or maybe it was the brain simply fully recovering. There's no way to know for sure." "So unlucky, right?" "I guess so if I stayed overnight." "What then?" "Shall we continue our morning activities and then have breakfast together?" They lay in silence to sleep, but Martin had another question. "Vicky, do you think you're willing to start a serious relationship?" There was a long silence, and Martin feared he might have said something wrong and scared her. He predicted she might step out of bed and ask for a ride home. There was no doubt about her attraction to him, and not just her appearance. She was smart, and he enjoyed being around her. This, of course, wasn't love yet, but after the divorce, she was the first woman he considered a serious relationship. "Can we talk about this in the morning?" "Of course, let's discuss it in the morning." "Good night, Vicky." "Good night, Martin." Vicky woke up before Martin. Seeing him peaceful, she decided to let him sleep. She used his bathroom, and then went to the kitchen to see what she could cook for breakfast. Martin's question before bedtime had taken her by surprise. Not because he wasn't attractive to her, but she was simply focused on having fun. She had been telling herself for several months that she didn't need a man in her life, and to some extent, that was true. She had a good job, and some good friends, so she didn't need a man. But if she were completely honest with herself, she did want that. But when she tells the truth to a polite guy, what would he say? Martin woke up to the smell of food. He entered the kitchen and found that Vicky had put on his shirt from the night before and located the apron he kept in the cabinet. "I was planning to invite you for breakfast," she said, "but now it's too late. You can invite me for lunch. Hurry up and shower, and breakfast will be ready." 10 minutes later, Martin joined Vicky at the table just as she was arranging the plates and bowls on the table. There was an egg sandwich, a couple of sausages, and a slice of buttered toast. "I didn't know I had sausages," he said. "In the fridge there. Hope they're edible." Martin grabbed a piece and said it tasted really good. Breakfast was quite peaceful, with Martin taking care of the kitchen cleanup as Vicky had prepared the food. They chatted about miscellaneous things until everything was loaded into the dishwasher. That's when he turned back to Vicky. "I'm ready to talk, mainly to listen, Vicky. I don't want to put you in a difficult position or interfere with your life. If you're not interested in anything other than an overnight, that's fine. You don't owe me anything. I know I just need to let you know something. And maybe we can do that in the bedroom." They held hands and went into the bedroom, sitting down on the bed facing each other. Vicky tightly held both of Martin's hands. "Martin, I know we only met last night, at least in the real world. I think you're a wonderful person, and I really like you. But there's something I need to tell you. I said my husband left me for a 20-year-old, and that's true. But that's not the whole story. The main reason he left me is that I can't have children. He wanted to have a child and sought someone who could provide that for him. He didn't want to adopt a child. He saw not having our own child as a failure, and I was the cause of it. And no, I really don't know how he feels after the divorce. I'm over 40 years old. I have a grown-up daughter. I don't mind not having children, but that's not a barrier." "Glad to hear that. Another thing I want you to know, at least I want to be honest, I'm not proud of it. After the divorce was finalized, I felt pretty awful about myself. I'm getting older, and I just lost my husband to a woman almost half my age. I'm 37 if you're curious. I care, but in any case, I wasn't going to ask." They both chuckled a bit. "I also feel quite incomplete. I guess that's the most fitting word to express the truth. Honestly, I don't feel like a woman at all. How can you be a woman without having children? I know what you're thinking, but that's exactly how I felt at that time. So I decided to prove that I'm a woman. If I couldn't be a woman with children, then I would be a woman who satisfies men, mostly anonymous ones, but there are plenty of them. I called myself Angela and never refused to go home with anyone when I wanted to. This went on for a few months until I realized it was self-destructive behavior and started seeing a therapist. Even then, I continued to do it, less frequently, until I finally reached a point in my life where I could stop." "Is that what you were doing last night?" Martin asked cautiously. He didn't judge, and he didn't want her to think that way. But last night she was a predator woman. There was no doubt about that. "Yes, that's right. I have needs as a woman, and sometimes I go out to satisfy them. But if before I used to leave with the first person who called me, now I carefully choose who I pick. Many nights, I go home alone, and take care of everything myself. I guess I should be happy that I passed the test. Of course, Martin. I really enjoyed our time together. And to answer your question, I genuinely want to explore more, but I want to be honest about what I've been through. Really, I've been tested, and luckily, I didn't get infected with anything. It's surprisingly fortunate. I don't need contraception, but if you need proof, I can get a doctor's note. Assuming you're willing to be tested, I want both of us to get tested and agree to be exclusive to each other." Martin sat in silence for a few minutes, and Vicky waited anxiously but patiently. Finally, he was ready to respond. "Vicky, thank you for being honest. I know that must be really difficult. I think I should be like you. Our experiences aren't much different after the divorce. I'm really glad that I was able to do that. But I feel sad about my inability. I had no idea how I would ever get a woman and face the possibility of living completely alone. My therapist pointed out that as we age, many women lose interest in sexual relationships and prefer care unrelated to sex. I think I might have to find an older woman than me or wait a few years until I regain my ability. Even when everything returns to normal, I'm not in the best condition. And just like you feel the need to prove yourself as a woman, I feel the need to prove myself as a man. I often go out to find women to prove, at least in my mind, that I'm a talented man. I'm not more selective than you. Some women, to put it mildly, I've had some relationships. This went on for a while, and I was unlucky like you. I was awakened by an outbreak of spots and had to admit to the doctor that I didn't know the name of my sexual partner. We clarified everything, and during the psychological process, I began to focus on my behavior. It had been a long time since I had a relationship with a woman without using protection, but I'm happy to be tested, and I have no problem with just choosing one person. So, can we test? You and I, Vicky asked, winking and knowing the answer. I put a yes. Martin answered the question emphatically. Martin's protective equipment ran out before noon, and the inevitable confrontation with Diana occurred after Martin and Vicky had been dating for about 3 months. Their relationship was very strong, and Vicky and Dallas understood each other well. Martin and Vicky had separate houses, but they spent every night together, and it seemed like they were getting ready to get married. They went to a club for older people, with a DJ playing music and the interior designed to separate the dance floor from the tables, creating conditions for real conversation. Martin and Vicky enjoyed their drinks and chatted about this and that. The evening went well, so Vicky was surprised when Martin's smile suddenly disappeared, and his eyes looked far beyond her. She followed his gaze. Martin and Diana saw each other almost simultaneously. While Martin's face became neutral, Diana's face showed a smile as she approached the table. Diana still held bitterness after the divorce. Even after this time, she still believed that she hadn't really done anything wrong, except perhaps lack caution, but for her sexual needs, satisfying with another man when her husband wasn't up to the task certainly wasn't on the list of things she did wrong. So when she approached the table, her intention was not to make everything pleasant. Marty, it's great to see you. Diana spoke in a tone that seemed clearly sarcastic. Diana, Vicky, this is my ex-wife. Martin introduced, although he wished he didn't have to. Diana, meet Vicky. Nice to meet you, Diana. I've heard a lot about you, Vicky said, although she wished she knew nothing about Diana. Really, I haven't heard anything about you at all, Diana replied bitterly. We're divorced. Diana, it's been over a year now. My life is no longer your concern. If you don't mind. Martin left the sentence hanging, but the meaning was clear. He was inviting his ex-wife to leave. Oh, of course, Martin. I don't want to disturb your date, but Vicky, there's something I need to tell you. And what is that? Vicky asked, glancing at Martin before turning back to look at Diana. Surely you wouldn't want to bother him. We divorced because he couldn't perform anymore, Diana replied bitterly. Martin observed Vicky carefully, awaiting her response. Vicky tried to restrain a small laugh and asked Martin, raising an eyebrow, Is that true, Martin? You haven't told me about this. He just shrugged, and that was Vicky's cue. Diana thought she had them, had thrown a wrench into Marty's relationship, just as she had done with her and Bill. She would enjoy this. However, her happiness was short-lived. Well, good, because if what I jumped on last night didn't work, a little buddy would really kill me, wouldn't it? Diana's smile immediately vanished. Vicky and Martin exchanged a somewhat mocking look at Diana's predicament, and she just looked puzzled. Wait a minute, what is she saying, Marty? Are you saying that things still works? In these rare meetings, Dallas didn't announce Martin's personal life to his mother like a champion. Diana, as usual, was also in the dark. How could it? Doctors found a treatment or something. Marty and Vicky remained silent, letting Diana become more intrigued. This is unbelievable, because this issue ended my marriage. I think I at least deserve to know what I did wrong. The smile disappeared from Martin's face. First, Diana, your behavior ended our marriage, not my condition. You chose to do what you did, not me. Second, you don't deserve anything. We are divorced, and my private life is just that, mine. Up to this point, Marty, you can blame my choices if you want, and I can't say you're wrong. But if everything goes back to normal, okay. Diana, it can't be. The doctors think that, whatever problem I had after the first accident, it just took time to recover. If you were patient and stayed with me through my illness, as our vows promised, we could still be husband and wife. Diana's mouth opened, but she tried to think about what to say. This information shocked her. I can't believe this. God really hates me. He just wants to believe in those vows, Martin muttered. How did this happen? Diana asked, her eyes sparkling. Nothing at all. Really nothing. So now you know. Can you leave us to continue our evening? Diana stood there thinking for about 30 seconds before looking into Martin's eyes. You're right, Marty. I apologize. I was wrong to do what I did. I was short-sighted and selfish. I should have been stronger. I ruined a good marriage. I'm really sorry. Diana turned and walked away, not just from their table but from the club. Martin and Vicky watched until she was out of sight, even feeling a bit sorry for her. Then, Martin turned back to Vicky. Let's dance, my love. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky got married.